The first gunshot of the day echoed through Mercy Creek as Nora Reid clutched her husband's pocket watch to her chest, knowing that this time, unlike the other mornings when James rode away with promises of return, he wasn't coming back. The undertaker had delivered his body 3 days prior, riddled with bullets from a stagecoach robbery gone wrong. Now, standing on the porch of their small homestead in the Arizona Territory of 1878, the 26-year-old widow faced a future as empty as the vast desert surrounding her. "Mrs. Reid, I've brought the last of your husband's things from the sheriff's office," Deputy Wilson said, handing her a small leather satchel with hesitation in his eyes. "And Sheriff Donovan asked me to remind you that the property taxes are due in 60 days. Nora accepted the satchel with trembling hands. "Thank you, Deputy. Please tell the sheriff I'll have the money." She wouldn't. James had left her with $15 and a homestead that required more strength than one woman possessed to maintain. The bank would claim it soon enough. "There's talk that Mr. Hollister from the Mercantile is looking for a wife," the deputy added awkwardly. "Being a widow and all. Folks are wondering what you'll do now." Nora's spine stiffened. "I'll manage, Deputy. Good day." After he left, she sank into the rocking chair James had built when they'd first arrived from Boston 2 years ago. She had followed her husband west with dreams of adventure and prosperity. Now at 26, she was alone in a harsh land where a woman without a husband was considered little more than a burden. "No one's going to marry a widow," she whispered to herself, tears finally breaking free. "Not out here where young girls are scarce enough." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her quickly wipe away her tears. A tall figure on horseback appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. Nora reached for the rifle beside the door, another skill James had insisted she learn. She raised it as the rider approached. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. The horseman stopped, raising his hand slowly. "Madam, I mean no harm. Name's Jackson Stone. I'm looking for water for my horse if you can spare it." He was tall and weathered, with eyes the color of the desert sky at dawn. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but of good quality. The holster at his hip held a well-maintained Colt, but it was the gentle way he patted his horse's neck that made Nora lower her rifle slightly. "The well's around back," she said. "You can draw water there." "Much obliged." He tipped his hat and led his horse around the side of the house. Nora followed at a distance, rifle still in hand. She had learned quickly that trust came at a high price in the West. "You're James Reid's wife, aren't you?" he asked as he worked the pump. "Heard about what happened in town. My condolences." "Thank you," she replied stiffly. "Are you passing through or staying in Mercy Creek?" Jackson let his horse drink before answering. "Bought the old Simmons Ranch about 10 miles east. Planning to raise horses. Alone." A smile creased his tanned face. "For now, though a man needs help with a place that size. Good luck finding it. Most folks around here are already settled or moving on." Jackson studied her for a moment. "You look like you could use some help yourself, Mrs. Reid." "I don't need charity, Mr. Stone. Wasn't offering any. But I do need supplies from town, and I'm betting you do too. Wagon's safer than riding alone these days. Bandits have been hitting lone travelers." Nora hesitated. She did need supplies, and the thought of the 4-hour ride alone was daunting. "I'll be ready at sunrise." "I'll be here." He mounted his horse with easy grace. "And Mrs. Reid? You might want to bring that watch inside. Looks valuable." She glanced down, realizing she still clutched James's watch. "It's all I have left of him." Jackson nodded once, understanding in his eyes. "Till morning, then." As promised, Jackson arrived at dawn, driving a well-maintained wagon. Nora was waiting, dressed in her best remaining dress of faded blue cotton that had once been quite fashionable in Boston. "You look nice," he commented as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "Appearances matter in town," she replied. "A woman alone gets enough talk without looking bedraggled." They traveled mostly in silence, though Nora found herself stealing glances at her companion. He was older than she'd first thought, mid-30s, perhaps with streaks of silver at his temples. His hands were calloused but clean, and he handled the reins with confident ease. "What brought you to Arizona Territory?" she finally asked as they approached town. "Looking for a fresh start," he answered. "Spent 10 years driving cattle up from Texas. Saved enough to buy my own place. And no wife to help you run it." Jackson's lips quirked. "Haven't found a woman willing to put up with me yet." In town, Nora endured the whispers and pitying glances as they made their way to the mercantile. Mr. Hollister, a balding man with small eyes, greeted her with what he clearly thought was charm. "Mrs. Reid, what a pleasure. I was just telling Mrs. Hollister, God rest her soul, that we should invite you for Sunday dinner." "Mrs. Hollister passed 2 years ago," Nora whispered to Jackson. "I heard," he murmured back. While Nora selected the essentials: flour, coffee, beans with careful attention to her limited funds, she noticed Jackson in conversation with Sheriff Donovan. Both men glanced her way more than once. "Everything all right?" she asked when Jackson rejoined her. "Just catching up on local news. Sheriff says there's a gang operating north of here. Best we head back before dark." Mr. Hollister cleared his throat as he totaled Nora's purchases. "That'll be $4.60, Mrs. Reid." Nora's heart sank. She had only brought $4. "I'll have to put back the coffee, add it to my bill, Hollister," Jackson interrupted. "Along with these." He placed a sack of hard candies on the counter. "I can't accept," Nora began. "Consider it payment for letting me water my horse yesterday. Those are for my sweet tooth, anyway." Outside, Mrs. Peterson, the preacher's wife, cornered Nora while Jackson loaded their supplies. "My dear, I see you found company already," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "So soon after poor James." "Mr. Stone is a neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. He kindly offered to escort me to town." "Of course, dear. Though a widow in your position must be careful of appearances. People talk." "Let them," Nora replied, more boldly than she felt. "Good day, Mrs. Peterson." In the wagon, Nora's hands shook with anger and humiliation. "Town's the same everywhere," Jackson commented, noticing her distress. "People with nothing better to do than mind others' business." "She all but called me," Nora couldn't finish. "I heard." His voice was gentle. "Pay it no mind. What matters is what you know to be true." They were halfway home when the first drops of rain fell. Within minutes, it became a downpour, turning the dirt road to mud. "We need shelter," Jackson shouted over the thunder. "There's an abandoned line shack about a mile east." The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was dry. Jackson tended to the horses while Nora found an old lantern and managed to light it. "Storm's not letting up," Jackson said as he came inside, water streaming from his hat and coat. "Might be here a while." Nora paced the small space nervously. "Mrs. Peterson will have a field day with this. You're worried about your reputation. I have little else left." Jackson removed his wet coat and hung it by the door. "Tell me about Boston, Mrs. Reid. What made you follow your husband west?" Grateful for the distraction, Nora spoke of her childhood in a merchant's family, her marriage to James, the ambitious bank clerk with dreams of Western prosperity, and their journey to Arizona. "He promised we'd return to Boston wealthy within 5 years, she said softly. "Now I can't even afford passage home. No family to help. My parents died in an influenza outbreak before we left. James was all I had." Thunder crashed outside, and Nora jumped. Jackson offered her a piece of hard candy from his pocket. "Sugar helps with nerves. My mother always said so." As the storm raged, they shared stories. Jackson told of his childhood in Virginia, losing his family farm after the war, and his years working cattle drives. "I've seen enough of wandering," he concluded, ready to put down roots. "Is that why you bought the Simmons place?" "It's been empty for 2 years. They couldn't make it pay. They were growing cotton. I'm raising horses." The ease of their conversation surprised Nora. For the first time since James died, she felt something other than grief and fear. When the rain finally stopped, the road was too muddy for travel. "We'll have to wait till morning," Jackson said. "I'll sleep in the wagon." "Don't be ridiculous," Nora replied. "There's room enough in here." She blushed at his raised eyebrow. On opposite sides, of course. That night, lying on her side of the small shack with Jackson's coat as a pillow, Nora listened to his steady breathing and wondered what James would think of her situation. He had been a good man, if sometimes reckless, and had genuinely loved her. But he had also left her woefully unprepared for life without him. "Mr. Stone," she whispered. "Yes, Mrs. Reid." "Thank you for your kindness today." In the dim light, she could just make out his smile. "Sleep well, Mrs. Reid." The following weeks brought changes to Nora's life. Jackson made a habit of stopping by her homestead every few days, always with some practical reason: borrowing tools, returning a pie plate after she'd sent him home with apple pie. asking her opinion on saddle blankets he was considering for his horses. Each visit left Nora more confused about her feelings. The guilt of finding another man's company enjoyable so soon after James's death warred with the undeniable lift in her spirits whenever she saw Jackson's approach. One afternoon, he arrived with a young Appaloosa mare. "Thought you might need a horse of your own," he explained. "Your husband's gelding is getting old. I can't accept a horse, Mr. Stone. It's not a gift. It's a trade. I need help breaking some young stock, and you're good with animals. You work for me 3 days a week. The mare is yours." Pride warred with practicality in Nora's mind. She desperately needed the income and the independence a horse would provide. "Very well," she agreed. "When do I start?" Working at Jackson's ranch revealed a new side of life to Nora. While James had focused on growing cotton, a crop ill-suited to the Arizona climate, Jackson's horse operation was thriving. He had a small but efficient setup with carefully constructed corrals and a sturdy barn. "You've accomplished a lot in a short time," she commented one day as they worked together training a spirited colt. "Had a clear plan before I arrived," he replied. "Army's always buying good horses, and the cavalry outpost at Fort Benton contracted me for 20 head by year's end." Nora enjoyed the work more than she had expected. She had always loved horses, and Jackson was a patient teacher, showing her how to gentle the young animals without breaking their spirit. "You have a natural way with them," he told her one afternoon as she successfully led a previously skittish filly through a series of obstacles. "Most people try to dominate. You persuade. Animals are easier than people," she replied. "They don't judge or gossip." Jackson leaned against the corral fence. "Speaking of gossip, I heard in town that the banker's planning to claim your property for taxes next month." Nora's stomach clenched. "Mr. Hargrove mentioned it when I was in town yesterday. I asked for an extension, and he said a woman has no business trying to run a homestead alone. Suggested I find a solution before the deadline." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Meaning remarry." "Mr. Hollister has been particularly attentive," Nora said with a grimace. "Hollister is a weasel who overcharges widows and treats his clerks like slaves. Nevertheless, he's one of the few options for a woman in my position." Nora stroked the filly's neck to hide her discomfort. "Unless I return east to work as a seamstress or governess." "Is that what you want?" "What I want hasn't mattered for some time, Mr. Stone." That evening, as Jackson escorted her home, they paused on a ridge overlooking both their properties. The setting sun bathed the landscape in gold and crimson, the beauty at odds with the turmoil in Nora's heart. "I've been thinking about your situation," Jackson said carefully. "Please don't offer to pay my taxes, Mr. Stone. My pride couldn't bear it. I was thinking of a different arrangement." He turned to face her fully. "A business partnership of sorts." Nora raised an eyebrow. "What kind of partnership?" "Marriage." The word hung between them in the evening air. Nora stared at him in shock. "Before you refuse," he continued quickly, "hear me out. You need security and a way to keep your land. I need help with my ranch, someone with good sense and a way with horses. We get along well enough. It could be a practical solution for us both." "A marriage of convenience?" Nora's voice was barely above a whisper. "To start," he admitted. "Though I won't lie and say I haven't grown to admire you, Mrs. Reid. I hardly know you. You know I work hard. I don't drink to excess. I've never raised a hand to any woman." His eyes held her steadily. "I would treat you with respect, and your property would remain yours, joined with mine. And if I refuse, then I wish you well. Continue to employ you as long as you're here, and we remain neighbors and friends." Nora looked out over the land, her mind racing. "I need time to think." Of course, it's not a decision to make hastily. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She paced the small cabin, her thoughts a tumult of conflicting emotions. Marriage to Jackson would solve her financial problems and allow her to stay in the home she had worked so hard to build with James. But could she marry a man she didn't love? Wouldn't that be a betrayal of James's memory? Yet as dawn approached, Nora had to confront the hard truth. Love hadn't protected her from her current predicament. James had loved her, but left her unprepared and vulnerable. Jackson was offering security, respect, and partnership. Perhaps that was worth more than romantic notions. 3 days later, she rode to Jackson's ranch. He was in the corral, working with a young stallion, his movements sure and confident. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said when he approached the fence. And it's a practical solution. She met his gaze directly. But I won't enter a marriage based on falsehoods. I respected James, but our marriage wasn't perfect. He was reckless with money and made decisions without consulting me. I won't live that way again. Jackson nodded slowly. Fair enough. What are your terms? Equal partnership in all decisions. My property remains in my name, though we can work it together. And, she hesitated, no expectations of marital relations until I'm ready. If her last condition surprised him, he didn't show it. I agree to your terms, though I hope in time you might come to want more than a business arrangement. A week later, they stood before the justice of the peace in Mercy Creek, exchanging vows with only the necessary witnesses present. Nora wore a simple gray dress, not black, but not festive either. Jackson was clean-shaven in a new shirt, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. Do you, Jackson Stone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Judge Matthews intoned. I do. His voice was clear and steady. And do you, Nora Reid, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Nora hesitated only briefly. I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. There was no kiss, just a brief handshake that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Outside, they faced the curious stares of townspeople. Mrs. Peterson approached with a tight smile. Well, that was certainly expedient, she said, barely 3 months a widow. Before Nora could respond, Jackson placed a protective hand at the small of her back. Mrs. Peterson, my wife and I thank you for your concern. Now if you'll excuse us, we have a ranch to run. Wife. The words sounded strange to Nora's ears as they drove home. She was Mrs. Stone now, a name she had never expected to bear. They had agreed that Nora would continue to live in her cabin while they decided which homestead would be their permanent residence. Jackson would stay in his house, but they would work both properties together. People will talk about our arrangement, Nora said as they approached their homestead. Let them, Jackson replied. What matters is what works for us. The following weeks established a new routine. They rose at dawn, worked together until dusk, taking meals together either at her cabin or his house. Nora found herself looking forward to their conversations over dinner, discovering Jackson's dry wit and thoughtful nature. A month into their marriage, Jackson arrived at breakfast with plans rolled under his arm. I've been thinking, he said, spreading the papers across the table. If we build here, connecting your cabin to a larger structure, we'd have the advantage of your established garden and the better water supply. Nora studied the drawings with surprise. You've put a lot of thought into this. Is it presumptuous? I wanted to respect your home, but also create something that could be ours. The consideration behind his plans touched her. He had designed a home that preserved her existing cabin while adding a proper kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a covered porch. It's lovely, she admitted. But can we afford it? The Army paid for the first 10 horses yesterday. He placed a bank draft on the table. More than enough to cover materials and still pay our taxes. Construction began the following week. Jackson hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy work, but he did much of it himself. Nora watched with growing admiration as the structure took shape, revealing Jackson's skill as a builder. Where did you learn to do this? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch, sharing coffee after a long day's work. My father was a carpenter before he took up farming, Jackson explained. He taught me enough to be dangerous. I'd say you learned more than that. He smiled at her compliment. What did your father teach you? Bookkeeping. He believed a woman should understand finances, even if society didn't approve. A wise man. His lessons serve you well. They would have served me better if I'd insisted on managing our money when James was alive, she said with a sigh. I let him take control because it seemed the wifely thing to do. Jackson was quiet for a moment. May I ask about him? Your first husband. Nora gazed out at the darkening landscape. James was charming and full of dreams. We met at a Christmas ball when I was 19. He worked at my father's bank and had grand plans for our future. You loved him. I did. He could make me laugh like no one else. Her voice softened with memory. But he was restless, always chasing the next opportunity, certain that prosperity was just around the corner. And you followed him west. To my father's dismay, he offered James a partnership to stay, but the West called to him. She blinked back unexpected tears. James wasn't perfect, but he loved me in his way. Jackson reached across the space between them and briefly covered her hand with his. He was lucky to have you. The simple touch sent warmth through Nora's body. She withdrew her hand, suddenly confused by her reaction. It's getting late. I should turn in. Of course. Good night, Nora. It was the first time he had used her given name, and it lingered in her mind as she tried to sleep. The house was finished by early October, a solid structure that blended the old and new seamlessly. The night before they planned to move Jackson's belongings in, a fierce storm hit, bringing wind and driving rain that threatened the newly completed roof. Nora was awakened by water dripping onto her bed. She hurriedly placed buckets to catch the worst leaks, then heard pounding at the door. Jackson stood there, drenched and worried. Are you all right? I saw the light. The roof is leaking in several places, she explained, ushering him in. Together they worked to contain the water, climbing into the attic space to place tarps where the new roof joined the old. When they finally descended, both were soaked and exhausted. You can't stay here tonight, Jackson said, looking around at the water-spotted ceiling. Gather what you need. You'll sleep at my place. I can't, Nora, you're my wife. At least on paper. His expression was resolute. I'm not leaving you in a leaking house during the worst storm of the season. Too tired to argue, she packed a small bag and followed him into the howling wind. They rode double on his horse, Nora holding tight to Jackson's waist as they navigated the dark trail to his ranch. His house was simple but solid, with no leaks evident as the rain pounded the roof. A fire still smoldered in the hearth, and he quickly built it up while Nora stood dripping on the plank floor. The bedroom's through there, he said, gesturing to a door. I'll sleep out here. I've taken your bed too many times already. I insist. He handed her a clean shirt from a nearby chest. You can use this to sleep in. I'll hang your wet things by the fire. Too exhausted to protest further, Nora changed in the privacy of his bedroom, emerging in his shirt that hung nearly to her knees, her wet clothes bundled in her arms. As Jackson took them, their fingers brushed, and Nora felt that same unexpected warmth spread through her. Their eyes met in the firelight, and for a moment, neither moved. Jackson broke the silence. You should rest. Tomorrow we'll be busy with repairs. In his bed, surrounded by his scent leather, soap, and something uniquely him, Nora found sleep elusive. Their marriage had been one of convenience and mutual benefit, but something was changing. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. By morning, the storm had passed. They rode back to find several trees down near the house, but the structure itself had weathered the night with only minor damage. The roof needs reinforcement where the new section meets the old, Jackson assessed. I can fix it today. As promised, he spent the day on the roof while Nora cleared debris from the yard. By evening, the house was sound again, but they were both filthy and exhausted. I'll heat water for a bath, Nora offered. You've earned it. Later, as Jackson bathed behind a screen in the kitchen, Nora prepared dinner, trying not to think about the man washing just feet away from her. When he emerged, clean-shaven and dressed in fresh clothes, his hair still damp, she felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Your turn, he said, gesturing to the bath. Water's still hot. At dinner, Jackson seemed unusually quiet. Is something wrong? Nora finally asked. He set down his fork. I've been thinking about our arrangement. Her heart sank. You've changed your mind. No, he said quickly. But I wonder if you have. It's been 3 months, Nora. We've built a house together. We work side by side every day, but you still keep me at a distance. That was our agreement. Agreements can change when circumstances do. He met her gaze directly. I need to know if there's a chance for more between us, or if this will always be a marriage in name only. The question hung between them, demanding an answer Nora wasn't sure she had. I care for you, Jackson, more than I expected to. But I feel disloyal to James. As if I'm betraying his memory by feeling this way. Jackson nodded slowly. I understand. And I'll wait, Nora. But I won't pretend I don't want a real marriage eventually. That night, alone in her bed while Jackson slept in the new second bedroom, Nora confronted her feelings honestly for the first time. She respected Jackson, enjoyed his company, and increasingly found herself attracted to him. But grief and guilt still held her back. The next morning, she rode into town alone, needing space to think. At the general store, she was selecting fabric for curtains when she overheard Mrs. Peterson speaking to another woman. "Of course it's a marriage of convenience," Mrs. Peterson was saying. "The widow needed a provider, and Stone needed a woman to cook and clean. No real feeling involved. But they seem well matched," the other woman countered. "No one marries a widow for love, my dear," Mrs. Peterson replied with certainty. "Especially one whose first husband left her with nothing but debts. She's damaged goods, settling for security." Nora's hands trembled with anger and humiliation. She abandoned her shopping and hurried outside, nearly colliding with Mr. Hollister. "Mrs. Stone," he greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Or do you still prefer Reid?" "Stone is my name now," she replied coldly. "Of course. Though I must say, I was disappointed by your hasty remarriage. I had hoped to court you myself." "I'm quite content with my choice, Mr. Hollister." His smile tightened. "I wonder. Stone's an outsider, barely established. I could have offered you a position in town society. I prefer horses to hypocrisy, Mr. Hollister." "Good day." As she mounted her mare, Sheriff Donovan approached. "Mrs. Stone, glad I caught you. There's been trouble at your place." Nora's heart raced. "What kind of trouble?" "Nothing serious," he assured her. "Some cattle broke through your north fence. Your husband's handling it, but asked me to let you know he might be late." "Thank you, Sheriff." On the ride home, Nora's thoughts tumbled over one another. Mrs. Peterson's cruel words competed with the memory of Jackson's patient kindness. Mr. Hollister's condescension contrasted sharply with Jackson's consistent respect for her opinions and abilities. And then there was the way her heart beat faster when Jackson smiled at her. The comfort she felt in his presence. The growing desire she could no longer deny. By the time she reached home, the sun was setting. She found Jackson mending the broken fence, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool evening air. "Sheriff Donovan found you," he said, glancing up from his work. "Yes. He said there was trouble with cattle. Matheson's herd broke through. No real damage." He hammered a final nail and stood, stretching his back. "You're home earlier than I expected." "I heard something in town that upset me." Concern crossed his features. "What happened?" "Mrs. Peterson," she said. Nora hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "She said no one marries a widow for love. That I'm damaged goods who settled for security." Jackson's expression darkened. "That woman needs her mouth washed out with soap." "Is she wrong?" Nora challenged. "Did you marry me for convenience alone?" He set down his hammer and approached her slowly. "When I proposed, I told you I admired you. That was the truth, but not all of it. What's the rest? I've admired you since that first day, when you stood on your porch with a rifle, defending your home." His voice deepened. "I've respected your strength in the face of loss. I've enjoyed your wit and your wisdom. And yes, Nora, I've wanted you as a man wants a woman." The confession hung in the air between them. "Why didn't you say so before?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it. You needed time to grieve, to heal." He reached out slowly, as if approaching a skittish horse, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I was willing to wait. And now," her voice was barely a whisper, "now I'm asking if you're ready for a real marriage. Not out of duty or convenience or practicality, but because there's something growing between us that deserves a chance." Nora stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing again. Of the pain. Life offers no guarantees, Nora, but some risks are worth taking." She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. "Mrs. Peterson said no one would marry a widow for love." Jackson's hand covered hers. "Then she's never met me." The simple declaration broke something loose inside Nora. All the grief, fear, and hesitation that had held her captive gave way to a surge of feeling too powerful to deny. She rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, Jackson remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then his arms encircled her, drawing her against him as he returned her kiss with gentle passion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nora saw in his eyes everything he'd kept restrained these past months: desire, tenderness, and something deeper that made her heart race. "I think," she said softly, "that I'd like to properly move into our home. All of it." That night, they truly became husband and wife. Jackson's tenderness revealed a depth of feeling that words alone could never express. In his arms, Nora found not just passion but a profound connection that healed something broken within her. As dawn approached, she lay beside him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Nora," he murmured, stroking her hair. "Are you all right?" "More than all right." She raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "I think I might be happy." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "That's a good beginning." Winter arrived with bitter winds and occasional snow flurries. The newly expanded house proved warm and sturdy, with the fireplace Jackson had built at its heart keeping away the worst of the cold. Nora discovered the joy of true partnership as they settled into their life together. Jackson consulted her on every aspect of their growing ranch, valuing her practical intelligence and financial acumen. Together, they planned the spring breeding program for their horses, and Jackson taught her to train the young colts for cavalry requirements. On Christmas Eve, they sat before the fire, sharing mulled wine and memories of holidays past. "My mother always hung pine boughs over every doorway," Nora recalled. "The house smelled wonderful for weeks." "Mine insisted on new candles for every window," Jackson replied. "Even during the war, when wax was scarce." Nora leaned against him, comfortable in their closeness. "I have something for you. It's not much." She retrieved a package wrapped in brown paper and string. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the cover tooled with an intricate design of horses running free. "I noticed you making notes about the bloodlines and training progress," she explained. "Thought you might like something more permanent than loose papers." Jackson traced the design with his finger. "It's perfect." "Did you do this work yourself?" "Yes. My father taught me leatherworking too. Said a merchant should understand the goods they sell." "It's beautiful." He kissed her softly. "I have something for you as well." His gift was a small wooden box, expertly crafted with a delicate rose carved into the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a gold locket. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a miniature photograph of the two of them, taken in town the previous month when a traveling photographer had set up his studio. "How did you manage this?" she asked, touching the tiny image with wonder. "Persuaded the photographer to make a special size." He took the locket and fastened it around her neck. "I wanted you to have something that was just ours, not connected to the past." Tears pricked Nora's eyes. "It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." Later that night, in the warmth of their bed, Nora gathered her courage for the conversation she'd been postponing. "Jackson, there's something I need to tell you." He propped himself up on one elbow, concern in his eyes. "What is it?" "I think I might be with child." His expression transformed from worry to wonder. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely. But I'm late, and there have been other signs." Jackson placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered. "Our child. You're pleased?" "Beyond words." He gathered her close. "Are you happy about it?" "I am, though I'm also frightened. Childbirth is dangerous, especially out here." "We'll ride to Phoenix when the time comes," he promised. "They have a proper doctor there. I won't take chances with you or our baby." As winter gave way to spring, Nora's pregnancy became evident. Her body changed, growing rounder as new life flourished within her. Jackson was attentive to her every need, taking on more of the physical labor while encouraging her to rest when necessary. News of their expected child spread through Mercy Creek, changing attitudes toward their hasty marriage. Mrs. Peterson became noticeably friendlier, offering knitting patterns for baby clothes and advice Nora politely received but rarely followed. One warm April afternoon, as they sat on their porch watching a thunderstorm build over the distant mountains, Nora felt the baby move for the first time. "Oh," she gasped, placing her hand over the spot. "What is it?" Jackson asked, immediately alert. "The baby. Here, feel." She guided his hand to her swelling abdomen. For several moments, nothing happened. Then a definite push against his palm made Jackson's eyes widen. "That's our child," he said in awe. "Strong, like its mother. Or stubborn, like its father," she teased. Jackson laughed, then grew serious. "Nora, there's something I've wanted to say for some time." "What is it?" "I love you." The words were simple, but filled with certainty. "I think I have since that first day, when you stood your ground with a rifle in your hands and grief in your eyes." Nora's heart swelled. Though their relationship had deepened into genuine affection and passion, neither had spoken those precise words. "I love you too," she replied, the truth of it washing through her like a cleansing rain. "Not because you saved me or gave me security, but because of who you are, your kindness, your strength, your heart." The baby kicked again, as if in approval, and they both laughed, joy binding them together as surely as the child they had created. May brought wild iris blooming across the range and increased activity in preparation for the foaling season. Jackson expanded the stable to accommodate their growing herd, and Nora, despite her advancing pregnancy, insisted on helping with the record-keeping and gentler tasks. On a particularly beautiful morning, they rode out together to check the north pasture where several mares were due to foal. Nora rode a gentle gelding, moving at an easy pace that accommodated her changed body. "The miller's oldest boy asked if he could apprentice with us this summer," Jackson mentioned as they crested a ridge. "Says he wants to learn horse breeding." "He's a good worker," Nora agreed. "And having help would be sensible, especially with the baby coming." They stopped to rest in the shade of a cottonwood tree, spreading a blanket for a simple picnic. As they ate, Jackson shared his plans for expanding their operation. "The Army contract's been renewed for another year," he explained. "And I've had interest from ranchers as far as Texas who want our stock for breeding." "We'll need more land for that many horses," Nora pointed out. Hargrove at the bank mentioned that the Johnson place might be available. Their sons decided to go east for schooling. Nora smiled at his use of "we" and "our," a natural acknowledgement of their partnership that had developed gradually over the months. "It adjoins our north boundary," she mused. "Good water rights, too." Their discussion was interrupted by a rider approaching at speed. It was young Tommy Miller, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Mr. Stone, Mrs. Stone," he called as he reined in. "Sheriff sent me to warn you. The Barton gang's been spotted heading this way. Robbed the stage near Mesa yesterday." Jackson was immediately alert. "How many?" "5 men, heavily armed. Sheriff's forming a posse, but wanted folks out this way to be on guard." "Thank you, Tommy. Tell the sheriff we're heading home to secure the place." As the boy rode off, Jackson quickly packed up their picnic. "We need to get you back to the house." "The Bartons are dangerous," Nora said, remembering stories of the notorious gang. "They killed 2 guards in the Tucson robbery last year." "All the more reason to get you to safety." Jackson helped her mount, his movements efficient but gentle. "We'll take the creek trail. It's more sheltered." They rode in tense silence, Nora acutely aware of her vulnerability in her pregnant state. Jackson kept one hand near his holstered pistol, scanning the terrain continuously. They were within sight of their ranch when the sound of hoofbeats made them halt in the cover of a stand of mesquite. 5 riders appeared on the ridge above their property, studying the layout of the homestead below. "That's them," Jackson whispered. "Stay here in the trees. I'm going to circle around and approach the house from the back." "No," Nora clutched his arm. "It's too dangerous. We need our rifles and ammunition from the house," he explained. "And we should get the horses into the barn. They're too valuable to lose." Before she could protest further, gunshots echoed from the direction of town. The riders on the ridge turned their attention toward the sound. "That's the posse," Jackson said. "They're closing in. This is our chance. The gang's distracted." Making a quick decision, they used the creek bed as cover, approaching their ranch from the east where a small stand of trees provided concealment. When they reached the barn, Jackson hurried Nora inside. "Stay here," he ordered. "I'll get the weapons from the house." "Be careful," she pleaded, one hand protectively over her belly. Jackson slipped out, keeping low as he made his way to the house. Nora watched through a crack in the barn door, her heart pounding. More gunfire sounded from the direction of the ridge, followed by shouts. Minutes stretched like hours before Jackson reappeared, carrying 2 rifles and a box of ammunition. He had just reached the barn when a lone rider galloped into the yard. "Stone," the man shouted. "Come out and face me." Jackson pushed Nora deeper into the barn, handing her one of the rifles. "That's Luke Barton. Stay hidden. You can't go out there alone," she argued. "He's looking for me, not you. The others must be engaged with the posse." Jackson checked his rifle. "If anything happens, use the root cellar tunnel. It comes out behind the south ridge." Before she could stop him, he slipped out the back of the barn. "Barton," Jackson called, stepping into view with his rifle ready. This is private property. The outlaw wheeled his horse to face him. He was young, barely 20, with cold eyes and a sun-weathered face. You're the one who's been helping the sheriff track us. I gave him information when he asked for it. Jackson replied evenly. Now I suggest you move on before the posse gets here. Barton sneered. My brothers are keeping them busy. I came for you, Stone. You cost us a good hiding place when you bought this land. That was business, nothing personal. Feels personal to me. Barton raised his pistol. The shot that rang out didn't come from Barton's gun, but from the rifle in Nora's hands as she stepped from the barn. The bullet struck the ground near Barton's horse, causing the animal to rear in panic. The next one won't miss, Nora warned. The rifle steady despite her fear. Barton struggled to control his horse, giving Jackson time to take aim. Drop your weapon, Barton. It's over. For a tense moment, the young outlaw seemed ready to fight. Then the sound of approaching riders made him reconsider. With a curse, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, ducking low in the saddle. Jackson hurried to Nora's side. Are you all right? I couldn't let him shoot you, she said, her voice shaking now that the danger had passed. Not when I've only just found you. He pulled her close, mindful of her condition. That was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever seen. Probably both, she admitted with a weak smile. The posse arrived minutes later, led by Sheriff Donovan. Stone, Mrs. Stone, you both all right? We're fine, Jackson assured him. Luke Barton was here, but he rode north when he heard you coming. We got 2 of the gang, the sheriff reported. The others scattered. We'll keep searching, but wanted to make sure you folks were safe. Mrs. Stone, you should be resting in your condition, not facing down outlaws. My husband needed help, she replied simply. That evening, after the excitement had passed and the house was secured for the night, Nora sat in their bedroom while Jackson knelt before her, his head resting gently against her swollen belly. I was so afraid today, he confessed quietly. Not for myself, but for you. For our child. I felt the same fear when he aimed at you. She stroked his hair. I realized then that I couldn't bear to lose you. You won't, he promised. Not if I have any say in it. Life offers no guarantees, she reminded him, echoing his words from months before. But some loves are worth the risk. Summer arrived with blistering heat and the promise of new life. As Nora's time drew near, Jackson insisted they travel to Phoenix as planned, where a proper doctor could attend the birth. They stayed with friends of Jackson's, a banker and his wife, who had a spacious home near the center of town. Everything looks to be progressing normally, Dr. Wilson assured them after examining Nora. A few more weeks, I'd say. Those weeks passed slowly for Nora, uncomfortable in the summer heat and anxious about the coming ordeal. Jackson remained attentive, reading to her in the evenings and massaging her swollen ankles and back. I've been thinking about names, he said one night as they sat on their host's veranda, seeking relief from the stuffy indoors. Have you? Nora smiled, placing his hand where the baby was particularly active. What have you considered? For a boy, perhaps Thomas, after my father. His expression grew thoughtful. For a girl, I thought. Maybe Eleanor. After your mother. Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. You remembered. I remember everything you tell me. He kissed her gently. They're just suggestions. The choice is yours. I like them both, she said softly. Though I have a feeling this little one is a girl. A daughter with your spirit and intelligence would be a blessing indeed. Labor began on a stifling August night, the pains waking Nora from a restless sleep. By morning, Dr. Wilson had been summoned, and by afternoon, the pains had intensified to a point where Nora clutched Jackson's hand with each contraction. You need to wait outside now, Mr. Stone, the doctor finally instructed. Mrs. Wilson and I will take good care of your wife. I want to stay, Jackson insisted, looking to Nora for support. It's not proper, Mr. Stone, Mrs. Wilson said firmly. Husbands wait outside. It's tradition. Nora, between pains, managed a smile. When have we ever cared about tradition? I want him with me. Despite the doctor's protests, Jackson remained, supporting Nora through the long, difficult hours that followed. As the sun set and the lamps were lit, Nora's strength began to falter. I can't, she gasped after a particularly grueling contraction. I can't do this anymore. Jackson wiped her brow with a cool cloth. Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know, Nora Stone. The woman who faced down an outlaw to protect her family. the woman who rebuilt her life when others would have given up. His words gave her renewed determination. With the next contraction, she bore down with all her might, and moments later, the cry of a newborn filled the room. "A girl," Dr. Wilson announced, placing the squirming infant on Nora's chest. "A healthy daughter." Jackson's eyes shone with tears as he gazed at his wife and child. "She's perfect, like her mother, Eleanor," Nora whispered, touching the tiny, red face. "Eleanor Jane Stone. Welcome to the world, little one," Jackson murmured, gently stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. "You are so very loved." In that moment, looking at her husband and daughter, Nora felt a completion she had never known before. The circle of loss that had begun with James's death had transformed into something new, a family born of both choice and love. They returned home when Eleanor was 3 weeks old, finding their ranch well tended thanks to young Tommy Miller, who had proven himself a responsible caretaker in their absence. The house that had once seemed too large for Nora now felt exactly right, filled with the sounds of family. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, visitors came to see the baby and offer congratulations. Even Mrs. Peterson seemed genuinely warm as she admired Eleanor. "She has your eyes, Mrs. Stone," the older woman commented. "But her father's chin, I think. We believe she has her own spirit," Nora replied with a smile. "Strong-willed already." After the visitors departed, Nora found Jackson in the nursery, watching their sleeping daughter. She slipped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible." She moved to his side, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "When James died, I thought my life was over, that no one would want a widow with nothing but debts and memories." "Then you never met the right man," Jackson said, echoing words spoken months before. "Some of us know real treasure when we find it." Together they watched their daughter sleep, the future stretching before them like the wide Arizona sky, vast, sometimes challenging, but filled with infinite possibility. 5 years passed, bringing changes to the Stone ranch and family. Their horse breeding operation flourished, gaining a reputation throughout the territory for quality stock. The house expanded again to accommodate their growing family. Eleanor had been joined by a brother, Thomas, now 3, and another baby was expected in the spring. On a crisp December morning, as the family decorated pine boughs for Christmas, a letter arrived from Boston. "It's from my cousin Margaret," Nora said with surprise as she broke the seal. "I haven't heard from her in years." Jackson bounced Thomas on his knee while Eleanor carefully strung popcorn garlands. "Good news, I hope?" Nora's expression grew thoughtful as she read. "She's widowed, with 2 children. The factory where her husband worked has closed, and she's struggling." She looked up at Jackson. "She asks if there might be opportunities here." "What are you thinking?" he asked, knowing his wife well enough to read her intentions. "The Johnson place has been empty since we bought it. The house needs work, but it's sound. She could live there, help with the books and correspondence for the ranch." "Does she know anything about horses?" "She's a quick learner. Like someone else I once knew." Nora smiled, remembering her own early days of ranch life. "Then write and tell her to come," Jackson decided. Family should help family. Eleanor looked up from her popcorn string. "Will there be children for me to play with?" "Yes, sweetheart. A girl about your age and a boy a little younger than Thomas." "Good," the child declared. "I'll teach them to ride." That evening, as they sat before the fire, Nora composed her reply to Margaret, describing the life she had found in Arizona, not glossing over the challenges, but emphasizing the opportunities and support she would find. "Do you ever regret it?" Jackson asked as she sealed the letter. "Coming west with James? All you went through?" Nora considered the question seriously. "I regret his death, of course. I regret the pain and fear." She placed a hand over her rounding stomach. "But I can't regret the path that led me here, to you and our children." He pulled her close, his hand covering hers. "When I bought this land, I hoped to build something lasting. I never imagined it would include all this happiness." "Nor did I." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their children play on the hearth rug. "When they said no one would marry a widow, I believed them." Jackson kissed her temple. "Then you'd never met me." "Thank heaven I did," she whispered, turning to meet his lips with hers. "Thank heaven I did." Outside, Snow began to fall gently, covering the ranch in a blanket of white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly as the Stone family celebrated not just the coming holiday, but the love and second chances that had brought them together, a love that had transformed grief into joy, and a practical arrangement into a bond that would endure for all their days.